Good morning, everyone. I'm Rafaela Lopes from the School of International and Public Affairs. And now we'll shift our focus to another relevant area, which is sustainable aviation fuels. With Brazil's abundant biomass resources and extensive knowledge in biofuel production, the country is uniquely positioned to play a key role in meeting the global demand on sustainable aviation fuels, contributing to the industry sustainable transition in sustainable energy. Our panel, the Fuel Stacks in Brazil's feedstock supplier and global production leader, will delve into the technologies and regulatory frameworks necessary to unlock the potential of aviation decarbonization. Joining us are 5 distinguished panelists. João Auler, Managing Director and Head of Infrastructure Natural Resources at UBS Brazil. Maria Elisa Curcio, Director of Corporate Regulatory and Sustainability Affairs at LATAM. Paula Kowarski, Vice President of Strategy and Sustainability at Raízen. Pedro de la Fuente, Senior Manager of External Affairs and Sustainability at IATA Americas. Yuri Orsi, Director of Feedstock and Carbon Markets Development at Acelen Renewables. And to mediate, we have Luisa Palacios, Deputy Research Director at the Center on Global Energy Policy at Columbia University, SIPA. Enjoy our panel.
Thank you. This is my 3rd year moderating for the Brazilian Climate Summit. I have to tell you guys, this is one of my favorite events. It is organized by 2 fantastic friends, Luciana and Georgie, but it is the heart of the Brazilian Columbia University students that are bringing this event to you, and it's really a very high-level event. Both current Brazilian students and former Brazilian students, some of which have been research assistants, so I am really, really happy to be here and to see them. This is a really very interesting panel, and I cannot think of a better lineup than the one that you guys have in front of you. So this is going to be an interesting discussion. Because we're going to discuss, we're going to talk about sustainable aviation fuels. And this is about how we decarbonize a sector which is a hard to decarbonize sector like aviation. And so there are many challenges and opportunities linked to sustainable aviation fuels, but this panel is going to walk you through some of the issues that they're facing, some of the opportunities that they're looking at, and they're going to tell you about how Brazil fits into this equation. Knowing that sustainable aviation fuels, according to the International Energy Agency, needs to scale to 11% of total primary energy supply, energy consumption in the aviation from 0 currently, or almost 0 currently, not 0. And this is a clean energy solution where Brazil actually has a lot to play and a lot to contribute to. So with that, I think I'm going to start with my friend Pedro. And Pedro, if you could also introduce yourself when you answer this question, which is, I think we need to start with understanding the sustainability aspects of aviation and how this fits into this discussion and why sustainable aviation fuels is part of this discussion.
Thank you, Luisa, and good day to everyone. It's actually a pleasure to be back in this school talking about sustainable aviation fuel. So I represent IATA, which is the International Air Transport Association. We are the largest airline trade association in the world, representing today about 360 member airlines and covering 85% of the total air traffic. Our main goal is to ensure that we have an equitable playing field for all of our member airlines worldwide. So in focusing on sustainability, obviously from an industry standpoint, we are not new to the arena. We've been managing our carbon footprint since 2012, and since 2021, we rolled out an industry-led initiative to achieve zero emissions carbon CO2 emissions by the year 2050. And what this means is that it's a four-prong approach strategy. It includes rolling out sustainable aviation fuels. 62% of the total emissions that we can abate by 2050 will come from sustainable aviation fuels. Other will come from new technologies such as hydrogen, electric aircraft, operational efficiencies, and as well we'll have a residual emission about 19%, which we'll address with nature-based solutions or carbon offsets, and also with direct air capturing. Specifically, sustainable aviation fuels, and I always say that what differentiates us from renewable components is that the S side. It is not only a fuel that it is produced alternative to jet fuel, it is a blended fuel, meaning that today it can be mixed up to 50% with conventional jet fuel and used efficiently and safely in all the aircraft technologies that we have today. So it complies with all the technical standards and safety standards that we have as an industry. But the most important part, the S, which is sustainability. And when we talk about sustainability, we need to focus on how we produce the fuel. And how we produce the fuel, well, today you can produce it from crop-based feedstock. You can produce it from agricultural waste, forest residues. You can also use municipal solid waste and byproducts. And when we say sustainability, is that we need to ensure that throughout the process of producing these sustainable aviation fuels, it complies with sustainability standards. And these sustainability standards not only focus on greenhouse gas emissions reductions, but it also focus on the other two pillars of sustainability, which are obviously encompassing economic growth, opportunities for the markets, and also as well the social component. So when we focus on crop-based, and just to give you an example, we need to ensure that the crop not only reduces CO2 emissions, because that's where the actual reduction occurs, not when we burn it in the air, but it also complies with, it doesn't compete with land use changes. It does not compete with water use. It does not put in jeopardy food security, and obviously it is contributing as well to a respectful work environment. So we're not labor laws and everything else. And obviously with the byproducts and waste management is that to ensure that, for example, if we're using used cooking oils, that it is actual used cooking oils. So I'll leave it there to just ensure that we start up with the discussions on sustainability. Thank you.
No, thank you for laying out what sustainability means in the aviation sector. And because you mentioned that sustainable aviation fuels is actually a pretty important part of that strategy, we are going to discuss how exactly is it that we produce sustainable aviation fuels. So with that, Paula and Yuri are going to walk us through how their respective companies do that. And so I'm going to start with you, Paula.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Great to be here for the third time. Thank you, Jorge and Luciana, for putting this amazing thing together and to being able to see more and more different faces here that will hear about what we have to say about Brazil. So quickly about sustainable aviation fuel and how does ethanol connect into sustainable aviation fuel. So at Raízen, we are the largest global producer of sugarcane ethanol and sugar. And there is a very interesting technology trend that transforms ethanol into sustainable aviation fuel. So we use ethanol today to blend with gasoline in cars, in IC cars, reducing quite significantly the carbon intensity and the carbon footprint. And now the idea is that we do the same for aviation. Basically, there are actually two different technologies. There are maybe four, but two more advanced technologies to produce sustainable aviation fuel. One is HEFA, which is out of vegetable oils or UCO or tallow. And the second one is what we call the A to J, which is alcohol to jet, which is probably 2 years behind in terms of technology development compared to HEFA, and in earlier stages of scaling, but it's evolving pretty fast. By the way, Raízen was the first company to make the sugarcane ethanol qualify into the CORSIA regulation, and we are the ones supplying the first A to J plant here in Georgia. And again, we are 2 years behind in technology. I would say the sustainable aviation fuel produced out of HEFA is probably more competitive than sustainable aviation fuel produced out of A to J today. But this will very likely change soon. And the reason why it will change very much connects to your point regarding the sustainability. because we're talking about different feedstocks. And then, so the first feedstock for HEFA is going to be vegetable oil with, good level of competition with food. The second option, as I mentioned, tallow and UCO will probably already be in the same pricing point compared to first-generation ethanol. And then going forward, the first-generation ethanol, it's traceable. In our view, the level of competition with food, it's significantly lower in terms of land use compared to probably any other energy crop. In the very case of Brazil, sugarcane is only 1% of the territory and is responsible for almost 20% of the energy matrix, so it's pretty efficient. And then when it comes to being able to prove the reliability and the traceability of the value chain, it's absolutely unique because cane is a very perishable type of agricultural product, and you have to, you harvest and you crush it, and we can say at Raízen exactly from which farm the sugarcane came all the way through to the ethanol mills, to the mills production, and to SAF. And then, last but not least, still talking about the competitiveness and the cost, which I think will, to some extent, be part of the sustainability aspect as well, because it has to be affordable. What we see is that if we think about the word efficiency, right? And then at the end of the day, that's what we are all looking for. And I'm an engineer by background. I've been with capital markets throughout my entire career. Sustainability is relatively newer to me. But at the end of the day, 1 over efficiency means reduction in carbon emissions because we are reducing fuel consumption, because we're searching for the best option. So just for example, if I am to produce SAF here in the US, exporting the sugarcane ethanol, because the SAF investment here has a larger amount of subsidies and eventually will make more sense, that means my carbon intensity will be 20% higher because of the logistics of the ethanol. It's 2 liters of ethanol for 1 liter of SAF, so it's basically less efficient. And the logistics can bring an additional 20% in cost. So if we are here talking about efficiency for a global industry such as aviation, maybe the next topic should be, how do we make sure we produce SAF in the most efficient way in places where you can get the most efficient way of producing, right? And then make sure we build, the carbon trade and everything else that we need for that to happen and that to be efficient.
Thank you, Paula. I mean, you are underscoring how complex it is to do all of these things. Clean energy technologies is not just saying, I'm doing it and that's it. You actually have to prove everything at each point in time, because everything that you...
And certify.
And certify. So the institutional capacity that requires, I think is one cannot underestimate. So, Yuri, what about your process, the feedstocks that you're using, the technology pathways that you are betting on? Interesting to hear that too.
Sure. Well, good morning. Good morning, my colleagues in the audience. First, congratulations for the great event. It's my first time, but happy to be here next year and collaborate on such important discussions. And I think SAF discussion is so relevant for aviation sector. It's like the most important way to decarbonize it. And I think Brazil is on the way to support that globally. And that's what we at Ascend Renewables believe. First, Ascend Renewables, for those who don't know, we're a new company. We're a company backed by Mubala Capital, now with an innovative project to be a SAF producer in Brazil. We're probably going to be the first SAF producer in Brazil with a solution, integrated solution from feedstock to the biorefinery. So we're aiming to invest over the $3 billion on this first round of project, with a biorefinery that's going to be up and running in 2027, producing 1 billion liters per year of SAF. So really expressive amount of SAF that can cover Brazilian market and support decarbonization globally. And also, we're aiming to invest and develop a new energy crop through Macaúba. Macaúba, it's a native Brazilian plant, has a high energy content, and we are doing a really sustainable way with recovery of degraded pasture land. So achieving a really good SAF solution, a really low CI carbon intensity for those who doesn't know. that you can achieve SAF that can decarbonize 80% compared to the fossil fuel, and also with the recovery of the degraded land and also with the biomass of the energy crop, we can achieve up to 60 million tons of CO2 that can also be transformed into carbon credits. So it's a net negative solution that can drive solutions to the decarbonization of the aviation. And to your question is, a route of production, I think Paula gave an introduction, is HEFA, is hydrogenization of oils and fats, and I think that's the more mature, that's the lower hanging fruit, as a colleague said, so we need to explore that at the most, and I think alcohol-to-jet is the one that goes by and needs to be fostered to address decarbonization. And the main problem is feedstock. So feedstock on a sustainable way that doesn't compete with food, that doesn't bring any damage to the environment. So that's why we are investing in Loma Cauba on a sustainable way. I think that is a solution that can drive decarbonization and drive sustainability. So a net negative solution that can improve social and economic environment, that can bring a lot, not just a few, not just a solution to aviation, can bring a lot of sustainability to itself. And we do believe that Brazil has this potential. So that's why we chose Brazil. That's why we're aiming to have 3 billion investments and also a view to invest now over 13 billion. I think that's the view that Mubadala Capital has for this, and that's the opportunity we see in Brazil. And that's one of the solutions. I think Brazil can and be developing innovative solutions such as Macauba, such as second-G ethanol, such as other solutions to explore the potential of its energy and agribusiness sector.
Thank you, Yuri, for that intervention. I think you raised a very important point. This is not either or. This is and, because this is so complex that it's the mentality, you throw the kitchen sink to it, because you're going to need everything and more. So with that, I think understanding the deployment of clean energy technologies, it's not only about the standards, about how the production passed, but also about the consumer, right? And so the end consumer. And so with us, I think completing this part before we go to the financing part is Maria Elisa from LATAM. And what are the challenges that you face when integrating SAF into your company?
First of all, thank you for the invitation. Good morning, everyone. I'm in charge of regulatory affairs and corporate affairs at LATAM Brazil, and being here is very special, not only because I met many people that I know, but also because I'm learning a lot and listening a lot about other perspectives of looking to us. Talking about LATAM specifically, I'm going to bring to you a different perspective because we are an international company, but also we have a huge market for Brazil, for the domestic flights. So when we talk to IATA, for example, or for the producers of fuels, we bring a perspective thinking that SAF is the silver bullet for the decarbonization agenda to aviation. There is no doubt that aviation is committed to be net zero until 2050. But we have SAF as one of the main solutions to that. But also we have other perspectives of measures such as offsets, carbon credits that we need to put together and to work together to be net zero. Thinking that aviation, what we want is to have more and more people flying and looking to our costs and having the snapshot that 40% of one flight comes from fuel. So this matters. And talking about challenges, we have, as LATAM, our commitment, what we want is to buy SAF from Latin America region. So listening that we are going to have good chances of having the volume that we need, not only for the 5 next years, but until 2050, with raw materials that we know, with disruptive raw materials, with new technologies, needs to come also in a all-together discussion. We need to have airplane producers, we need to have air flight companies, and also we need to have consumers and passengers demanding and asking about that. We don't see too much people discussing about the consumer or the passenger perspectives. Many of us came here flying, so this is something that we need to discuss and to talk. Looking to Brazil, and I know that we're going to talk about regulatory environment, we have a very good dialogue with government. We listened today, the Brazilian diplomacy is protagonists in the discussion internationally. So what I see as the main challenge for us now in Brazil is the regulation. And I know that we are going to have a good opportunity to discuss that on the following topics.
Thank you, Maria Elisa.
Thank you.
So none of this is possible if there's no financing. One of the, I teach a class on the financing of the energy transition in emerging markets, and the scale of what needs to increase in terms of financing for all kinds of clean energy technologies continues to be daunting for a lot of emerging markets. So we have somebody here, a specialist in financing clean energy technologies, and not only globally because Bank is a global bank, but also in Brazil. So I think it would be very helpful to understand what the landscape looks like, the challenges that you face when financing these kinds of projects.
First of all, thank you all for being here. It's a pleasure to represent UBS and UBSBB here in this meeting. I would say we've been doing a lot of financing for energy transition and ESG-related themes in Brazil, right? And I would say SAF is one that we're dedicating a lot, not only Brazil, but in collaboration with our global team. There are really 5 aspects that are critical when we think about a SAF project that we're looking in, and this is both based on a credit perspective, so from a debt perspective, but also from the equity perspective. The number 1 is technology, right? Paula already mentioned that. Is it commercially proven already? Right? The more it is already proven, the lower the risk it is, right? So this is one important aspect. The second aspect is site selection. Does the company already have a site in place? Is the land owned? Do you have permits? You know, those are things that you generally assume it is, but it's not really always, right? So this is another important aspect. The third one is project and construction contracts, right? So do you have a detailed project already in place? Without that, you don't know the CapEx, how much it's going to cost. You need to know the CapEx, you need to have a detailed project. After you have a detailed project, you need to hire a construction company to execute that. How is that contract structured? Is it a turnkey contract? Is it a cost plus? Who bears the risk of CapEx overrun, right? Who is the counterparty? Who is the company executing that? Do they have the capacity to do that? Not only technical, but the financial in case there are some cost overrun and they need to compensate for that, right? Then the number 4, which is critical as well, which is offtake, right? And offtake we can divide in 2 themes. Offtake from the feedstock, right? And offtake of the product that you're producing. Feedstock, do you have that integrated or are you sourcing from third parties? How does the price of that, how do you control that cost? That's going to be a critical cost for any aspect, whatever, it's going to be a critical cost for the SAF production, right? How do you hedge? How do you control that cost, right? And feedstock, obviously, it's a critical point whenever we think about biofuel as a whole. And then the other is offtake for for the product that you're producing, from SAF, for SAF, but also some of these plants, they produce SAF as well as HVO, right? So how does that work? How long is the offtake? Who is the counterparty, right? Is it price is based on an index? Do you have some sort of a minimum cost in your offtake? A lot of projects, they do have an offtake, but it's an offtake that it has a reference of an index, and that does not necessarily mean you're going to have a return, because the cost of your feedstock is based on another index, and sometimes, depending on the future, the cost of the feedstock is going to be higher than the cost of the product, right? So this is a very relevant risk that financiers are trying to understand how to manage that. If you are integrated in the feedstock, that helps, right? But the offtake of the product, if it's a cost plus at least a minimum cost, it helps a lot. On offtake, you also need to think about what is the tenor, what is the time of that contract, because that needs to be aligned with the financing tenor as well, right? You cannot have an offtake of 3 years if you want to finance this project for 10 years. That's not going to work, right? Then a critical aspect as well: who is the sponsor behind, right? Who is developing the plan? Does it have its own capital and a strong balance sheet? So if there are some cost overrun, you know that the sponsor will come in and will participate, or not, right? What is the background? What is the track record of that sponsor to put a project of this magnitude in place? It's a very complex project that involve a lot of things: construction, feedstock sourcing. You're building pretty much from scratch. Many of these projects are being built from scratch, right? So I think those are the, I would say, the challenges we look, questions we hear both from debt investor as well as equity investors. Return is an important consideration as well, right? After all of that, what is the equity return I'm getting for it? If I'm getting like 10% return, why I'm going to do it? Unless you're doing for you want to do to have some benefit for the society. If you're looking for profit, that's probably not the project you're going to look for, right? So these are questions we're seeing. And then lastly, I think the regulatory framework of the place you are embedded, right? But this tends to be a global industry at the end of the day. So those are the aspects.
Thank you, Joao. This has really been very, I think, helpful for the audience. You pretty much walked us through the bankability of a project because the energy transition is one transaction at a time, right? And so, but you did mention something at the end, which I think is also like essential for a lot of these clean energy technologies, which is the regulatory framework, right? A lot of these markets are created by regulation. They need that public sector support or that public policy support. And so why don't we talk about that, about the kinds of public policies that are coming to support the production of SAF, and what do we see globally, and then discuss with all of you what it looks like in Brazil.
So perhaps I'll start by saying that we're building an industry that's not going to be focused on one country. We're building a global industry, and global industry means global standards. So that's why public policy plays such an important role. And we need to ensure that the standards, and when we say standards, it's the technical capacity of producing fuels in Brazil comply with the same technical standards as the fuel here in the US. So American Airlines, for example, flying into Brazil, is able to fly that aircraft outside of Brazil using the same technical standards for their fleet. So in that sense as well, and when building a global policy framework, we need to learn that aviation is also competing with other renewable energies. It's not new to the game. The HEFA process today, which Paula alluded to, it's what we've been producing synthetic fuel for diesel for the past 20 years. and we're just distilling a little bit more to achieve the SAF component. So it means that by competing, we need to ensure that the policy also focuses on what's going to drive aviation to use sustainable aviation fuels, right? And with that, we see at the same way different approaches. So globally today, in terms of policies, we see from focused on incentive markets, what we see here in the U.S. with the pass of the Inflation Reduction Act in 2022, or we focus on the supply side in terms of mandates, a typical policy mechanism that has been driven from the renewable component. From us, in a global standpoint, we don't say that there is a good policy. There is no such good policy. Governments need to ensure that they look inside the market conditions, how to produce the fuel. Am I able to produce this fuel? Because not every single market will be able to produce sustainable aviation fuels. And then how do I drive that demand? And we need to learn from the policies that today we have seen in solar and wind that have driven up the production of these renewable capacities and lowered the cost of accessing the production of energy from these two. And I will just put an example. In 2023 from the IEA, energy from solar reached about 7.8% of the total capacity worldwide, a jump from 3.5 in 2015. And that was driven by lowering the cost and putting in policy incentives to produce or make that transition to renewable energy. And that's what aviation will need as well in terms for SAF production to scale up and produce.
Okay, but Brazil doesn't have the balance sheet of the U.S., right? And so that's fantastic for the U.S. But how does a country like Brazil then deal with the same outcome, which is getting SAF up the ground? So any of you, okay, Paula, I can see that you wanna come in.
Yeah.
Let me just have Maria Elisa come in for this specific thing because she is the one facing the regulation. If you could just address the Brazilian regulatory framework, and then would love then both of you, Yuri and Paula, to react to what works best from a production standpoint, and then what works best for the bankability of the project from your point of view, Joao. So, Maria Elisa.
Thank you. I will split my answer in two topics. We can look to the bill of law that was approved on last week in the Congress. We can look to the discussions that we are having in our national agency. But when we specifically have this perspective of what has been discussed, there are many actors talking about, and we are being asked about subsidies, about credit, how to bring the environment, how to create the environment to produce. The obvious answers would be, we need to ask the government to have subsidies to produce. This is one way, but we have also the environment. For example, what BNDES, our development bank, made 1 month ago, bringing us 6 billion reais on credits to create the opportunity to many producers to start to study the market and to bring disruptive solutions, looking to sugarcane and corn, yes, but also to look into Brazilian potentials of other ways of having the decarbonization agenda. We see a very optimistic pathway being brought by the government and also by the society. The discussion is not only about the ways to produce, but the environment that the Brazil government, the Brazilian society can bring to have more and more players producing SAF in Brazil. What we face nowadays about the cost is because we buy traditional fuel from only one producer. And now, looking to the good part of having SAF is that the way that the things are coming, we are going to have many competitors bringing solutions to us. So I can be very pessimistic in one sense, but I can also be very optimistic in the other, because we see many investors coming, talking with different banks, having the Brazilian public bank looking hardly to that, and talking a lot. This dialogue is important because the domestic market demands, but in the way that we want more and more Brazilians flying, knowing the world and competing in the international environment, we need to be together and bringing more players to the market.
So from your point of view, what kind of public policies are the ones that are more efficient or effective for you guys to be able to scale that production?
Yeah, I think every one of us here is talking essentially about a value chain that needs to be efficient in full, because at the end of the day, it's going to cost more to have lower carbon emissions in the aviation business. So we need to think as a system, right? And then allocate the right risks and the right capabilities. And everyone will have to give up a little bit. So when I listen to João talking, he's really sharing the usual land release of a credit committee, right? And if we want to have everything in place, technology proven, scalability, and everything else with great cash flows to be able to fund, chances are we won't get there, right? And then if we want, the airline tickets not to be that expensive, then there's another problem, and so on and so forth. So I think regulations in this sense will have to play a very important role, because you have to allocate not only the subsidy but the penalty, if you like, right, to the right parts of the value chain. And then back to the situation in Brazil in particular, there's no IRA in Brazil. There won't be an IRA in Brazil. So what we need to do is to create a mechanism to export the Brazilian competitive advantage. And the mechanism will be a cross-border carbon credit deal. The way to fund will be, making sure everything that we produce, and we do produce more efficiently, and therefore with lower carbon emissions in Brazil, it's properly recognized and acknowledged globally. And then we have science-based targets and what have you. These guys have no standard for agribusiness. So, how can we discuss in that sense, right? So we need to promote the right certification, and this will happen as a combination of policies. So, for example, we have the Renova Bio in Brazil, which is the cap-and-trade mechanism to incentivize ethanol production at the end of the day at the expense of the fuels distributors. This is very relevant. Not sure if everyone knows, but to be able to issue a CBIO, a carbon credit, you have to be deforestation-free. And that's exactly what CORSIA requires us to be, deforestation-free. So there's something to build, combining those initiatives, until a point when we'll be able to create something that is, globally acceptable and proved, and then, at the very end of the day, we'll be able to trade the carbon credit. But it's important that we promote all the regulations and find ways to make them fungible, if you like, so that, the process in itself becomes more efficient, right? And that the certification itself, I hope, will also give the bankers a little bit more certainty about, the risks behind the projects. And at the end of the day, at least when we try and get funding for, and we did, Raízen did, all the second generation program, which is of billions and billions of reais in investments to do second generation in Brazil on our own balance sheet, without the recognition of the carbon reduction benefit. We hope that the recognition from those funding will come a little bit earlier in the process. That will make it easier, and we'll probably be able to do even more.
No, you do bring. There's a lot in that answer, including that clean energy technologies have a green premium, and part of making the scalability of these clean energy technologies is ability to pay for that green premium. And so, what is the role of public policy in doing that? Yuri, you represent a company that voluntarily decided to produce SAF in Brazil. How much did the public policy framework was relevant for your company?
That's a really good question. Are they crazy to invest $3 billion on that? But, well, it is an early stage.
Yeah, the craziness.
Yes. It is an early stage market. I think we're seeing growth. Just United States, I think last year, SAF was around 50 million gallons produced and consumed. And there is demand, or they are aiming to have 3 billion gallons by 2030. So the demand is there. I think that is the first point. The need for decarbonization is there. Now, we live islands of regulations, islands of carrots and sticks, or nothing, like in Brazil, that's still under development. And we, building this case, we started looking into those islands and trying to build our case with compliance to those islands and front-run the demand and achieve United States market, European market, Asian market, and even knowing that Brazil is going to be a market. When we first started this project, we didn't have the bill that is being approved. We didn't have that clarity. So now we do have clarity. Now I think the market in Brazil is going to happen. We're going to be ready for it. So I think we're surfing an early stage market that in the future, I think Paula brought it well, I think this is going to converge to a global market. Perhaps not a SAF market, perhaps a carbon market. I think in the end, you have products with carbon intensities. You have diesel, we have the sustainable aviation fuel. So that is going to convert into a SAF market. And I think being on the early stage, being investing in this, I think that's what we think position ourselves in Brazil with that potential, can position ourselves to be one of the great leaders on that journey of decarbonization. That's what I believe.
And I believe that it's important to you to share the information that you gave to us in the backstage about the volume. And the perspective that is that you are going to be able to provide the volume that we need more than what we thought before. Yeah,
with the law in Brazil, I think the demand in 2027, that is the first year, is going to be around 150 million liters per year. And that grows to 1 billion liters in 2036, 2037. And we're starting with 1 billion liters in 2027. So it's more than Brazil demands.
I think and Joao, bringing you to this discussion, one of the things that I'm hearing from Jury is, in that case, there's patient capital, playing the long game. It's not, and you had a discussion about off-takers, for example, and so the relevance of off-takers in order for you to believe in that project. And so we have patient capital, we have the off-taker. How relevant is having visibility about public policy for the bankability of the project? And I actually want to probe you a little bit on this issue about debt and equity, because these are industries where these are thin margins, right? So super important to understand the cash flow. But is this a better of an equity story, this kind of clean energy technologies, than a debt story?
Listen, I think the regulatory framework is key, right? And investors, they do look at the risk. If it's based purely on subsidy that is paid by government, that is not sustainable, right? Everybody knows that, especially when you go to countries like Brazil. So this overcost in the beginning needs to be shared. Pedro brought a great example, which is, let's look at how we got into the solar and wind energy. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, those projects were much more expensive to produce energy from that source of energy than from others. But the government was there imposing part of the consumers to pay more to develop that industry, with the vision that after you have scale, the cost will reduce and it's going to be competitive. Guess what? We're there nowadays. This is the most cost-efficient form of energy. Can't we see something like that in SAF? It's different, of course. There is offtake, which is a different variable, how you manage that, right? But I think that brings us a couple of lessons, right? We do see a couple of development banks trying to supporting the industry. Obviously, they still go through a lot of those questions, but they do have mandates to develop technology, right? So there are a lot of development company funds in Europe, in US, supporting their technology, their HEFA technology, their other technologies to be implemented, right? On the equity side, we see billions of dollars being raised for energy transition funds. Every traditional equity investor have raised an energy transition fund. Guess what? They're seeking higher returns than the regular funds, right? It's not really the energy transition fund that is willing to bet or to support this industry to develop.
Yeah, no, I want just to add here because it's super relevant to also consider what aviation brings. You know, aviation. If we were an economy where we will be between the 20th largest economies in the world, trillions of dollars today flow thanks to the service that aviation brings. And when we're talking about energy transition, we need to ensure that there is an energy transition, but at the same time that we're not disrupting the commercial services that aviation brings to the world. And that's why Maria Luisa was alluding to, the public service. In Europe, for example, or in the US, you have larger capital, access, obviously as well, and the airlines in the US, who today consume every single drop of the SAF that is produced in the country, are able to access those markets because of the incentives of the market that the government has given. Obviously, when we look into South America, these policies cannot focus into subsidies because the government does not have the capacity to do so. And that's why I go back to how I initiated the discussion, saying like every single market needs to look inside out. How do I build a local framework that services my local production and not necessarily, and then I compete into the world? And to Paula's point, opening up, ensuring that there is a sort of harmonized processes by which, if it's SAF produced from sugarcane ethanol in Brazil, how can it compete into the market in the US? And how then you can access the capital markets in the US and not necessarily rely on the burden only on Brazilian carriers to absorb the cost associated to that fuel. So I think that's what.
And it will be cheaper for the US, cheap at the end of the day, So how do you develop the efficiency again across the value chain? But then one last point about the aviation industry. I would totally appreciate the fact that no one wants to pay higher fares or that the airlines have to deal with their balance sheets and so on. But at the end of the day, on a relative basis, it's an industry that in principle can afford, on a relative basis at least. So affordability is relatively high. The level of education of people that travel is relatively higher, and is the kind of people that arguably would be willing to pay a little bit more. So provided that you just make sure each one gives up on its own piece.
So I think those are fascinating points, and just brought this reflection that unlike a lot of the clean energy technologies that we're talking about, where the demand is really about how to service local communities, consumers, and because the energy transition is a deglobalization of energy markets, right? Right now, oil and gas represents 80% of primary energy requirements. About 60% of the oil that is consumed is traded. So what we're doing is deglobalizing the energy markets. So your industry is an industry, you're thinking about this industry as still a global industry. You want to produce in Brazil, but with an eye of exporting it, right? And so therefore, this concept of interoperability between standards, what it means to have SAF here versus SAF there, that seems to me that there's a lot of connecting tissue that is still not there yet. And so interesting to see how that impacts the way you finance this. Are you financing SAF projects that are thinking about external markets? Are you thinking about how to standardize current standards in different markets? How far can you get with voluntary versus regulation? And whose regulation is the one that is the center of everything? So how do you sort out all of these things in that industry?
I'll break it down into simple layman's terms. When we produce sustainable aviation fuels and we burn the fuel, when we're burning it in our engines, we're still emitting carbon emissions. Where the emissions reduction occurs is in the life cycle assessment of the feedstock by which that fuel is produced. So therefore, when we talk about exporting that benefit, we are decoupling the physical attribute of the fuel with its environmental attribute. And that's what we're selling into the market. And this has already been used in renewable energies, and it's called book and claim. In aviation, we call it SAF accounting mechanisms because obviously how the system flows or how the fuel flows into the supply chain, there's no way of traceability whether it is a raízen molecule or an excellent molecule. There's no way. So we call it SAF accounting mechanisms. And this is what we need to build, a global framework by which we track that molecule, right? And we track who makes the claim of that emissions, and we sell those credits, either in a scope 1 emissions for airlines to reduce when they burn the fuel, or in a scope 3 for passengers or corporate customers from airlines that are able to then claim that they are flying more sustainably. So that is the main benefit, and that's why the policy is going to be fundamental in ensuring that there's a harmonized approach on sustainability, but also that there's a way of claiming that emissions elsewhere.
Thank you. Maria Elisa, you want to?
Yes, I believe that I was not clear when I was talking about costs. When we look to Brazil, the question for me is not about how many passengers we have, but how many Brazilians fly every year. When we compare Brazil with other countries, with other continents, we have a very low number of Brazilians flying. So if you want more Brazilians flying, we need to think about the total perspective of the cost. We need to think about that climate change, about the environment regulations cannot be a barrier to democratization of aviation in Brazil. This is important to bring the social part of this discussion, because of course that everyone here wants to be net zero in 2050, and we are committed to that. But the number of Brazilians that flies is too low, and we need to work together to have, in a sustainable way, the number of people flying up together.
Thank you so much for this fascinating discussion. You brought a lot. I've learned a lot from all of you, and I hope the audience did too. Please join me in thanking them for their intervention.